and very welcome to another Sparker Nation conversation. For those of you that may not have experienced one before, a Sparker Nation is a spark that ignites passion, that leads to action, that changes what's normal. My special guest today is a great old friend. I think, Peter, we first worked together back in the 90s, early 90s. So Peter Milligan, Peter's an organisational psychologist. We have regular conversations. We've recorded a couple in the past, and today we're recording this one as well because Peter has this wonderful course that coincides with your 60th birthday. Peter, 60 great lessons. I'm up to actually lesson 59, so only one to go. But they've been a great series, and a part of it was Peter's transformational model, which I really liked. And I said to Peter, it'd be great for you and I just have a one-on-one conversation about that. So what Peter's going to do is run through the model, then we'll have a conversation about it. So Peter, welcome. And
thanks, Ian.
Good to go with sharing screen.
Okay, so I'll get that happening. If I can find the right button. It was there a minute ago. Bear with me.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Right. So share. Okay. Have you got that?
All good.
All good. Okay, great. Well, nice to be with you. I'm very excited to share this. This is what I call a transformational map. Hang on a sec. There we go. A handy map for the transformational journey. Yes. This is something that's kind of come together over a number of years. I'm a person who loves to integrate different models and concepts together, and in very recent times, this whole thing's come together beautifully. And in fact, there's a further insight I've had literally in the last few days that I'm adding in at the very end as well. So,
so we're here, a first timer today. Then.
Hot off the press. Yeah. So anyway, I think it's really handy to have a map to tell us where we are, where we're going, where we've been, just to put things into context. And a lot of what I do, I believe, is around drawing from timeless wisdom. So I'm not pretending that I created everything I'm sharing with you. Really, what I'm doing is pulling from different areas timeless wisdom. And I think we recognize timeless wisdom, and it doesn't matter whether it comes from religious texts, spiritual teachers, musicians, poets, playwrights, Shakespeare, for example, or even a scientist, whether they're religious, agnostic, or atheist, or even your grandmother. We pick up timeless wisdom, and these are things that effectively are universal principles. So they exist throughout all time and space, irrespective of culture or anything. And so what I've done is I've grabbed a few different things, and I'm drawing from areas such as mythology, psychology, philosophy, and biology. But what I'm going to give you by the end is an integrated map that is really handy for all of us, because we're all on a transformational journey, individually and collectively, and it really helps to see where you are. So to kick off, I'm just going to talk about mythology. Now, as many people know, there was a book written in the late 40s by Joseph Campbell called The Hero with a Thousand Faces.
One of my favorites.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And what Campbell realized when he looked across different eras and different cultures is there was what he called the monomyth. It's a story that that has the same pattern to it. And it comes from all different cultures. So and we see it even in modern fiction and modern movies like Star Wars or Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings or The Matrix. And the model is something that everyone can identify with. It's called the hero's journey. And all of us, each of us, perhaps I should say, is on the hero's journey constantly. You've been doing it all your life. And essentially, the hero's journey is about moving between two different worlds. The ordinary world, our day-to-day world we know, and the special world, the unknown. And any adventure you've ever had is when you've entered the special world, the unknown world. And all through our lives, we've done it, starting school, changing schools, leaving school, going to college or university, or starting an apprenticeship, starting your first job, having your first long-term relationship, getting married, having children. You know, every time we do any of these things, we're moving from the world we know, where we're comfortable, into an unknown world. It's new to us. And it's in that place is where our transformation occurs and we become a better version of ourselves. So there are various sort of variations on the hero's journey, but I've created a 12-step model. So based on most of the ones I've seen. So we start off with our normal day-to-day life, and then we get the call to adventure. We're being urged to go and do something new or different. And our initial reaction is to resist that. We don't want to go, right? Because it represents stepping out of our comfort zone. And we all know that feeling, oh, I don't really want to go there. And what can be really helpful for us is to meet a mentor. And every one of us has had mentors in our life. It could be a friend, a relative, a teacher. It could be a paid professional, something that Ian and I do for people. We are mentors to other people, and we've had mentors ourselves all through our lives. And the mentor can't take the journey for you. The mentor can only be there at critical moments by your side to support and challenge you as you go on this journey. Then we step across the threshold into the unknown, and this is where the adventure truly begins. And as we do that, we're going to encounter allies and enemies, and we're going to be tested. And this is all about preparing us for the transformation. And it's really interesting. And I've coached, you know, leaders stepping into new organizations or new roles, and it's really important for them to work out, you know, who's with me, who's against me, to try and find their way. And, you know, as often is the case, sometimes the people you thought were going to be your worst enemy end up being your greatest allies, and vice versa. So it's all part of the learning. As we approach the innermost cave, we are going to be tempted not to go there because it's really scary. Like, oh, we start coming up with reasons not to go. But the hero must go. You know, I say, if you have to go if you want to grow. And what every hero must do is face the ordeal, go through the ordeal, facing the shadow. And the shadow essentially is our deepest fears, the things that we really don't want to do or face. But we can't be a hero if we don't go through the ordeal. And it's by going through the ordeal that we get the reward. So we come out the other side and the treasure. So in mythology, the dragon guards the treasure. The dragon is in the cave. Behind the dragon is the treasure. If you want the treasure, you have to face the dragon, which is essentially your fears. Now, I don't know about you, but whenever I've gone to see a movie that follows this structure, there's a sort of the climax of the movie is when the hero faces the beast, the dragon, whatever it is, and wins. And everyone in the cinema collectively sighs, you know, sigh of relief, and, you know, it's all over. And countless times I've thought, well, you know, the credits will roll, you know, within 5 minutes we'll be out of the cinema. But there's often another, you know, half an hour in the movie to go. And you're thinking, well, what else is going to happen? Well, that what else is actually the journey back. And the hero will actually face further challenges. And to me, this is about confirming and consolidating the transformation. It's all part of bringing it all together. And as the hero returns, they now have the opportunity to integrate these two worlds, the world they came from and the world they've just been through. So they become a better version of themselves, and they have a new level of mastery beyond what they had before. And the great thing about that is the hero now brings something back that they can help other people. And then for a time, they have a period of rest and stability before they get their next call to adventure. So every one of us is on this all of the time. We're constantly being challenged to go to that next level.
Yep, wonderful.
So that's mythology. Right, we'll come back to the hero's journey. Let's look at psychology. Now, having been a psychologist for the last 30 years, I've come across countless models about all sorts of things. And there are a number of models around change, but a favorite of mine is called the Change House. And it's based on a model by a Swedish psychologist, Klaus Janssen. It's called the 4 rooms model. There are extended versions of the Change House with extra rooms, but I'm just going to focus on the 4 rooms model. So the 4 rooms are the contentment room. And this is where we feel really good, life's going well. And, you know, we have no sense of needing to change. Why would we? You know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
Yeah.
However, as we know, life brings change. And initially we can be in the denial room, which is where we're aware that there's stuff going on around us, but we think it doesn't apply to us. And I think for many of us, exactly 2 years ago in early 2020, we were in the denial room. There was sort of stuff brewing, but I remember thinking, well, it'll just pass, you know, it doesn't affect me. But how wrong I was, and how wrong many of us were, because when, you know, life is bringing change, we don't get let off the hook. And eventually we wake up to the fact that actually things are changing and I do need to change. But this is called the confusion room, because we're thinking, well, okay, I get it. I need to change, but what, where, how, you know, where do I start? And it's a really difficult time. And in our darkest moments, we're just going to want to back up. We just want to go back to the good old days. But that's not how life works. And there's a great quote from Winston Churchill. It says, when you're going through hell, keep going.
Keep going.
Right. And this is like hell. It's like, it's really hard. You don't know which way is up. It can be a really, really difficult time. But if you keep going through it, and that's where, you know, having advisors and mentors and so on can be valuable for us. You know, they can help us sort of work our way through the confusion. And then we get to the renewal room. And this is where we're starting to feel good again, because we can see ourselves adapting and changing. It's not over yet. It's not done, but we are well on the way. You know, we sort of got the clouds are starting to part, or there's light at the end of the tunnel, whatever metaphor you want to use. And as we continue through the renewal room, we find ourselves back in the contentment room, where we can sort of relax, you know, sigh of relief. We're back. We've developed a new form of mastery. And, you know, it's all good. Now, in past talks I've given, one of my things I wanted to say to people is see change as a cycle, not as a single journey, because I think often we go, well, I'm going on a change journey and I've got to the end and it's all over. And it is for now, but it's never all over for good. There's more to come. Now, I had an insight that I've never seen anyone else make around this. One day it occurred to me that those 4 rooms are very like the 4 seasons of the year, which is, of course, a cycle. So the summertime is when the days are long and warm and we feel somehow more relaxed. It's harvest time. And in a business context, it's when everything's working for you. You've got plenty of clients, your systems and processes are working, you've got good profitability. It's great. And there's an old jazz classics, a song written about 100 years ago called Summertime. And the opening line is, summertime and the living is easy. Yeah. It's easy. It's great. You know, it's all wonderful. And there's another song around written about summer called The Summer of '69 by Bryan Adams. And in that song, there's a great line. Because he's reminiscing about this amazing summer and how wonderful it was. And then there's a line in the song, I guess nothing could last forever, because ain't that the truth? The summer eventually starts to come to an end. The arrival of autumn is very symbolic, because the leaves start falling off the tree. The harvest time is coming to an end, and we know what it means. We're heading towards the winter. Winter, it's dark, it's cold, the nights are long. And in business terms, a deep recession is like a winter. So what I say is that winter in the natural world will kill off any plants or animals that don't have the capacity to survive through those dark, difficult times. A deep recession will kill off a business that hasn't stored enough cash, is not able to re-engineer and adjust during difficult times. That business will simply die. But the ones that can can adapt or survive through those difficult times will come out the other side stronger. And then, of course, spring, the shoots start to appear, and we're moving back towards the summer, back towards harvest time. So not only have we got mythology and psychology, we've got a bit of ecology there, because it's the natural world. Because one of the things I believe is that nature is our greatest teacher. And sadly, we often lose contact with that.
Yes, I'll be with you on that. One of the reasons we live in this part of the world is because we still have 4 seasons.
Yeah.
Despite things going on, there's still distinct seasons.
Yeah. And I enjoy living in the UK because they're particularly distinct. They're even more distinct than Australia. But I think it's interesting. And of course, one of the things you teach, Ian, is about the law of the farm. So of course that maps beautifully onto this as well.
Yes.
There's a great expression, make hay while the sun shines. When it is summertime, you want to make the most of the harvest, but you also need to know that that is going to come to an end, and you need to be ready for the difficult times ahead. Okay, I'm going to bring in a little bit of philosophy now. So philosophy's been around as long as human beings have asked questions about how does life work, what does it all mean? And there's one particular piece of philosophy from ancient China that I particularly love. And this symbol, I think, is one of the most powerful symbols of a universal principle that exists. The yin-yang symbol is widely understood, but perhaps not, widely recognized, but perhaps not deeply understood. And I think it helps in building this particular map that I'm going to share. Now, the concept is of complementary opposites. So they need each other to exist, and life is about working between the two of them. A term I came up with recently, which is in one of my 60 lessons, I call it integrated polarity, which is that there is polarity and it's integrated into one. So a simple metaphor is that if I gave you a bar magnet and I said, could you just, bring me the North Pole? So you think, yeah, I'll get a hacksaw and cut that magnet in half, and you bring me the North Pole. Well, you haven't brought me the North Pole. You've now brought me a shorter bar magnet, because as many times as you cut a bar magnet, each little bar is still going to have a North and a South Pole. They're integrated polarity. You can't separate them. They go together. Now, unfortunately, in our culture, particularly Western culture, we have this kind of mindset. We don't think like that. We think like that. We think of black and white, right and wrong. We think of that there are sides, and we pick a side and we say, well, they're the good guys, or we're the good guys and they're the bad guys. We make the other side wrong. And if you doubt that that's embedded into our psyche, have a look at Parliament in London. So the House of Commons, the House of Lords, you have a government, you have an opposition. They face off against each other, and they're vying for power and moral superiority. And when you watch them in the chamber shouting and jeering at each other and blaming each other for any problems and wanting to take the credit for all the solutions, you know that you've got this black and white style of thinking. And it's all very entertaining. There's nothing wrong with going to this black and white thinking, particularly in something like sport. It's entertaining. It's much more engaging to watch a football match if you are, feeling connected to one of the sides. If you identify with one of the sides, you're going to enjoy the match more. So for any kind of entertainment, that kind of thinking is fine, but it's not a very good way to run a society, to run a business. And we have to, avoid doing this. But unfortunately, we do this too much. And probably now more than ever, we're seeing it play out in the world. Because of technology, because of social media, polarization is just going on everywhere around all kinds of topics. So a few quick examples. Throughout the 20th century, the big ideological battle was, which is better, free market capitalism or centrally controlled socialism? The whole Cold War was about these warring ideologies. Then you have things like a group of people are labeled as terrorists, but if you look at it from their perspective, they're freedom fighters. And it's quite funny because we will sometimes label a group of people as freedom fighters. So when Russia invaded Afghanistan in the 1980s, the people fighting the Russians, we saw them as freedom fighters from the West. You know, that they were the good guys. But you go forward a couple of decades, and suddenly those same people are terrorists because we're fighting them. So it just depends which side you're looking through. Then we have in the UK, nearly tore this country in half. We should Brexit, we should remain. The whole country became polarized and almost split down the middle over this. Then very topical in the last 2 years, there are some who say that lockdowns, masks, jabs, passports, mandates make our society safer. And there's others who say all of those things overall make our society sicker. And then, of course, the other big topic that's been kicking around for a while now is climate change is natural versus climate change is man-made. And most of us will look down those two lists and we'll find ourselves tending to identify more with one of the sides. And what I would invite people to do is to consider whether the other side may have something valuable to say, and maybe we should consider that. And you have a term that you use for that, don't you, Ian? It's not yours, not mine, but ours.
Yes, I call it shared view, because I think there's always a third alternative.
Yeah.
And so
yeah, absolutely.
Your view is important, my view is important, but our view is bigger than both.
Exactly, because you see things I don't see, and vice versa. And unfortunately, it seems easier. It's actually not good in the long run, but it seems easier just to pick a side and then justify and rationalize our side and make the other side wrong. And unfortunately, we have all kinds of psychological tricks we play on ourselves to do that.
If I recall correctly, I think Collins and Porras in their book Built to Last, they called this the tyranny of either or.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that binary black and white thinking that's so unhelpful. Yeah. And a beautiful illustration I came across a few years ago says it all, because what's true for you and what's true for me is but a reflection of a deeper truth. And it would be much more helpful if we try and find that deeper truth between us rather than argue for our particular view of what's true.
Yes.
So this kind of thinking turns into this. We move further apart, and then what happens is we go into a world of separation, misunderstanding, distrust, fear, hatred, extreme polarization, discrimination, demonization, and dehumanization. And if we have any doubts about where that goes, just look at what's happened in the last century, or in fact, it's gone over millennia. As soon as people start dehumanizing the other side, it doesn't end well for anyone. It's not good.
And I would argue that Ukraine is the great example, whichever side you are on. And the whole idea of sides, in my view, is flawed thinking. But all of these things have led to Ukraine.
Yeah, and it's just playing out once again. It's not the first time, and it may not be the last time, or if it is the last time, it means we're all doomed. But this is the game that human beings play, and we've just got to stop doing it. It's just it's not going to end well for us. So we move to the point when we're so far apart, we have no man's land between us, and we dare not leave our side. If people say, if you venture away from us, you're not one of us anymore. As George Bush said, after 9/11, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. He was kind of saying, you're a traitor to us if you even consider the other side of the argument. That is so unhelpful. What we have to do more than ever is seek to build bridges, because by building bridges and understanding, we move back to that and then back to that.
Wonderful.
Now, this whole concept of complementary opposites is timeless wisdom, in my view. And there was a major discovery made in the 1960s in brain science, which is the split brain studies, where they discovered that the two hemispheres of the brain have different specializations. It's far more complex than that, but broadly speaking, I think we're all familiar with the left versus right brain way of operating. And all of us, even though we may have a slight preference one or the other, each of us, every one of us uses both sides. You couldn't function effectively in the world if you didn't. And if you have a preference for one, then it's important that you have people around you that balance you. Okay, so I have a slight preference for left brain thinking. And one of the reasons I married my wife is because she has a slight preference for right brain thinking. And between us, we have a whole brain in our marriage. You know, I studied anthropology as well. And, you know, these broad categories existed in other cultures. You know, they didn't know about brain science, but the same concept. It is effectively the yin and yang.
Yeah.
So very quickly, I just want to touch on one form of complementary opposite or integrated polarity, and that is order and chaos. And often, you know, during times of chaos, you know, that's the last thing we want. We want structure and order and predictability. So people are drawn to order. But the truth is, chaos is an important part of this process because it is the gateway to all change and all growth and all evolution. So, for example, you know, you get a business or an organization that has a way of operating. It's been very successful for many years. Somebody inside the organization has an idea for improving the organization or the way they deliver their products and services. And people say that won't work here. That's not how we do things here. So that person will break out, set up a new business. And on day one, that business is more about chaos. There's lots of energy, lots of excitement, lots of ideas, but there's no structure yet. And if you want to build a business that's scalable and saleable, you have to build structure and process around it. But it's when businesses or people become so structured and orderly in their approach, they become ossified. They can't adapt to change in the world. They are essentially like dinosaurs and they will die. High street retailers, before the pandemic, a lot of high street retailers, certainly here, and I imagine in other countries, were going to the wall because the online revolution, you know, just disrupted their whole world. And some of them were in denial. It's like, you know, we've been around for 100 years, you know, we'll be fine. We've been through recessions and wars, but there was a big paradigm shift, and those that weren't able to adapt died. They just went out of business. So we need order and chaos. Right, so let's start pulling the map together. So we've got the change cycle from the 4 rooms model. We bring in the order and chaos. So there's our yin yang symbol. So as we move to greater and greater order, we move to a point of stability. At the other extreme, as we move through chaos, we come into change. And essentially, as we move to the top half of the cycle, there is a process of integration. And the simplest example is when kids go to the beach, they get their bucket and spade, they integrate millions of grains of sand. It is millions because I looked it up, millions of grains of sand into an integrated structure we call a sandcastle. At the end of the day, when the parents say, come on kids, time to go home, the sun's going down, it's getting cold, what do the kids do to their sandcastle, Ian?
Well, they generally, after much kicking and screaming, kick it all over.
They kick it all over. They have fun in the destructive part of the cycle. So they actually disintegrate their sandcastle. And whether or not they do that, Mother Nature will finish the job overnight. The tide will come in, the waves will flatten the sandcastle, and in the morning, there'll be a blank canvas for the kids coming to the beach the next day. So integration and disintegration are parts of that ongoing cycle of creation and destruction. It's part of that life cycle. Okay, so now we bring in the hero's journey. So on the left-hand side, we have the ordinary world, the world where everything is stable. It's the world we know. And on the right-hand side, we have the special world. It's the unknown world. That's where everything gets pulled apart. So the hero's journey, I showed it as a 12-point process around the circle, but broadly speaking, there are 4 phases in the hero's journey. The first one is we get the call to adventure and we go, I don't want to go, right? It's denial. It's like, I can't believe that I'm being asked to do this. I don't want to go. I'm not going. I don't need to go. But of course, we have to go. It's part of the journey. As we step into the confusion phase, this is where we don't know which way is up. It's difficult. We've got to work out who are our allies and enemies, and we're being tested and trialed. But as Churchill said, when you're going through hell, keep going, because when you get to the renewal phase, this is when you get the reward. The treasure is there for you, and it's not over yet, but you start making your way back. And then eventually you find yourself back at the contentment phase, which is in the hero's journey, reintegration, bringing the old world and the new world together and a sense of mastery that you did not have before you went round the cycle. And then, of course, you're waiting for the next round. Okay, so we have one more piece to bring in, and that is biology. So there's our basic model. There's a great TEDx talk by Dr. Alan Watkins called Being Brilliant Every Single Day. He breaks with TED tradition because you're not meant to be more than 20 minutes, but he does, it's in two parts. So there's two, you can watch them on YouTube. There's two parts, part one, part two. He introduces some great models. It really is a great video, but in part two, he brings in another model and he brings in human biology. And I was fascinated to see it because I suddenly thought that links back to this. He said, human beings can either be relaxed or excited, positive or negative. And there are biochemical correlates for each of them that can be found inside the body. So adrenaline is one we're all familiar with. In an excited state, we feel adrenaline. If we feel it in a negative way, we would label it as fear or anxiety. If we feel it in a positive way, it's a rush, it's a joyful experience, and it's all about how you label it. In fact, in psychology, we learned about a study that was done back in the days when ethics committees weren't so strong on things. They injected people with adrenaline without them knowing that it was adrenaline. They thought it was something else. They put them in two different social situations. They had the same experience in their body, but in one social situation, their interpretation of the adrenaline was excitement in a positive way. And then the other one, it was experienced by the people as anxiety and fear. Anyway, so those four states, positive versus negative, relaxed versus excited, brings four different ways of being. This is what Alan Watkins said. When we're positive and relaxed, we have this state of equanimity, contentment, and satisfaction. So we just feel really good about everything, about ourselves. So people who do things like meditation are seeking to find that. They're relaxing themselves physically and they're keeping themselves in a positive frame of mind. When we're relaxed, but we're in a negative frame of mind, we have this experience of being bored. Your life seems meaningless and pointless. We just don't enjoy our jobs anymore, whatever it is. When we're in a negative but excited state, of course, we're all familiar with that anxiety, the anger and the frustration. But when we're in an excited but positive state, it's a joyful experience. We feel passionate, we feel inspired. So, at the top of the cycle, there is integration. It's harmonious, coherent, and integrated. And at the bottom of the cycle, it's all falling apart. It's discordant, incoherent, and disintegrated. And it's all part of the life cycle. We'll bring in the hero's journey, ordinary world versus special world, and the four phases of the hero's journey. And this is the piece that the additional insight from literally the last few days. So you heard it here first. I saw a meme the other day pop up and it said this, and I'm going to start in the confusion phase. It's, oh, sorry, what have I done? Oh, I duplicated my slide. Apologies for that. And I forgot to take the duplicated one out. That was the duplicated one. Okay, if we go to the confusion phase, this is what the meme said. It said, hard times create strong people. So remember what Churchill said, when you're going through hell, keep going, right? This is where we really start to evolve and learn. It's one of the worst times of our life, but it's actually one of the most important in terms of pushing through that, and we get stronger. Then it said, strong people create good times. Then it said, good times create weak people, because people sit back, they relax, they get, literally and metaphorically flabby, right? Because, there's plenty to eat, there's plenty of food, there's, everything comes easy. Summertime and the living is easy. So we start to become weak. And then it says weak people create hard times, because if we don't develop the discipline that we need, we will just get really weak. So obviously we can talk about that one, Ian, but I just thought, when I saw those four things, I thought this maps onto this. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the model. I've created a cleaner, simplified version of that, which looks like that. And if you sign up for my 60 lessons, I'll give you the link in a minute, but if you sign up for 60 lessons, number 55, you can download it. But Ian, I'm happy to pass it across to you where, you know, anyone watching this can download it.
Yeah, I'll put a link to that. And I very much enjoyed lesson 55, which triggered this conversation.
Yeah, so we've still got a few minutes left to discuss. I might go back to the other one only because it's got that that new insight there, and we can just have a general chat about it all.
Look, I think, Peter, it's a wonderful journey through mythology, psychology, ecology, philosophy, and biology. And there were a lot of you started out talking about universal principles or timeless wisdom, and it really struck me as you were going through that there were reoccurrences of perhaps a larger universal principle or timeless wisdom, and that is that everything important is a cycle, a process. And there's a lot of talk lately about the circular economy, for example. So we're going round and round, not up and down or sideways. We're always going round and round. And I think this is a piece of timeless wisdom that underpins so many things. But I made a linkage that I hadn't made before as a part of what you were saying. So a day for firsts, because
brilliant.
I haven't sort of noticed this in this way before, but what holds a circular process or a cycle together is bridges. And your model includes a lot of wonderful bridges. But I thought that might be just a place to have a little conversation. So a timeless wisdom is life is a cycle, it's a process, it's circular. And what often takes us from one stage of the cycle to another is a bridge. That was my insight.
Yeah.
And a part of what we should be doing when we're working with folk is helping people to build bridges. Because I think when a business is in summer and it doesn't build a bridge to autumn, that's where the trouble is.
Exactly. So good times create weak people. You know, if you just sit back and think, well, you know, this is it, I've arrived, you know, and it's the same in our individual development. You know, people, like one of the things I talk about is career derailment. And so the Center for Creative Leadership, right back in the 80s and 90s, did a massive global study about what causes people's careers to go off track. Yes. And there were about half a dozen factors, but the two biggest factors won't be a surprise. One of them was problems with interpersonal relationships, which makes sense. If you don't get on with your boss or your team or your customers, you know, it's not going to end well for you. But the other one was the inability to develop or adapt. Now, I questioned their wording because I don't think it's about ability. These people have definitely developed and adapted to get as far as they have. It's when they think they no longer need to develop and adapt. That's where it goes wrong for them.
Yes.
And the classic example, and I've been through it, I bet you went through it, is when you're promoted because you're good at what you do technically. So you could be a brilliant engineer or accountant or lawyer or doctor, and you get promoted into a leadership or management role. And you think, well, I'm the best, you know, I'm the best of the crew here. So that's why I've been promoted. But unfortunately, you now have to develop skills you didn't have before. And if you don't know that, if you think, well, I can just be a really good accountant and be a great leader, you're greatly mistaken, because you're going to be challenged to do things you've never done before, have difficult conversations. Yes. And what a lot of people do is, well, I'll put that off. They go back into their office and they sit down with their spreadsheets because that's their comfort zone. So career derailment is definitely a failure to build that bridge across to the next phase of your development.
Yes,
where
I think the textbooks, they call it one reference, it's called the Peter principle. We get promoted to our level of incompetence. And often you've seen this hundreds of times, as I have, where the person was a great salesperson or a great engineer or whatever it was, but a hopeless manager because there was no training. They spent 30 years learning how to become a great engineer and zero time learning how to be a great leader.
And I hold organizations culpable for that, because they just assume, well, because he or she's so great, you know, they'll be great as a leader or manager. And that's a big mistake. And I really sympathize with people who are going through it, because I went through it. That's where you have the imposter syndrome. You don't know, you don't know which way is up. You're in the confusion phase, but no, you've not been given any sort of support or mentoring, whether it's external people like you or me, or someone internally to hold your hand through the process, you know, to say, this is normal what you're going through, and I'm going to, you know, support and guide you so you become the leader that we know you can become.
This is one reason I love your map, because you can really look at it in any phase, and you can feel comfortable that even when the going's tough,
yeah,
you can see that there's a next stage. All you got to do is build a bridge to it.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I like the metaphor of the map, because I think, you know, when you're lost, you're driving your car and you're lost, you know, either whether it's a, you know, sat nav GPS, or whether it's a physical map, you can identify, well, I'm in this village or town and I know what street I'm in. Now I know where I am and how to get to the next point. It's just vital that we have that map, and most of us just don't have it.
And I think it's also true in the world. I've often used the word map to help people with the difference between strategy and execution. And what I've taught people over a long time now is that strategy is a compass, but execution is a map. You need both.
Yeah.
If you're lost, you need a compass to know which way is north, but it's not going to help you get out of the forest.
Absolutely. In fact, that's one of the things when I've been driving my car, and the you know, the sat nav sort of is saying, you know, you need to go in this direction, but I don't know which way I'm facing. That's like right. You're at a crossroads and you don't know, because at the moment the car's not moving. And one saying I came up with is, you can't steer a vehicle unless it is moving. So you can't steer until you start, because I've done the analysis paralysis. I get stuck. And I'm scared of moving because it might be the wrong direction. Well, you have to start moving. And when you know it's the wrong direction, then you can turn around.
That's right. Yeah, no, I think it's just and knowing, I think, as the ancient oracles, you know, were very good at pointing to the fact that the first step to any kind of mastery is to know yourself. And I think perhaps the second stage from that, because that highlights to me the fact that self-awareness, in my view, is the number one leadership skill.
Yeah,
know yourself. And you allude to this at the start. After knowing yourself, you've got to know where you are, and your map not only tells you where you are, but it also tells you where you've been and where you're going, which you also alluded to at the start. And I think that's a great principle, because
gives you perspective.
It gives perspective, exactly. And often, even if we know ourselves, if we take that out of context or out of perspective, it can cause a lot of trouble. And so I like this map, because it tells us that this is where you are, this is where you've been, and this is where you're going. And I think transformation is a great word for it, because it really is changing the form, which is what transformation means.
Yes.
And often, you know, because transformation, as you know, Peter, has become a buzzword. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this with you was to say, look, transformation is not a buzzword. It doesn't need to be a buzzword. It's actually a process of changing form, and it's based in mythology, psychology, ecology, philosophy, biology, and probably any other thing we want to look at.
Yeah,
there's a changing form that has to happen, and I think this is missing in many change programs. I think the great oxymoron of business is change management. You know, we can't manage change. It's up there with performance management and strategic planning as oxymorons, in my view. But because we don't need change management, we don't need a change program. What we need is a change process.
Yeah,
that's what you provided here.
And guess what management is seen as being? It's about control. It's about wanting to control everything. That's why it's an oxymoron, because you actually have to go through a phase of being out of control. people are feeling out of control because their world is falling apart.
Yes.
I'll give you just a very quick example of how this played out. So about 18 months ago, this young lady approached me. She had a corporate marketing career. She'd been very successful in this field, but she was getting bored with it. Like it just didn't float her boat anymore. And she was much more interested in natural health. She'd become a yoga instructor, and she wanted to move into the well-being space, right? So she had this idea of, she felt drawn to move in that direction. And of course, this was kicking off for her during the pandemic. And I said, your timing's really good. There's a lot of mental health challenges right now, people needing to focus on their health, etc. So I said, this is a great opportunity for you. I said, when are you going to leave your job? And she said, well, I don't want to leave my job yet. And I said, well, you're going to have to start making plans to leave. We looked at her personal circumstances, because if she was a single mother with 3 young kids, I would understand her reticence. But the truth was, her husband had a stable, secure job. He was happy to support her. So all she had to do was let go. But of course, she didn't want to let go because she felt vulnerable, not, having her own income. So she refused to kind of leave her job at that point. And I said, well, that's fine. There's only so much I can help you with, really. And then she contacted me a couple of weeks later, and she was quite distressed. And she said, she's got a new boss, and she said, my new boss has called me in and told me that she's not very impressed with my my attitude, and she's not happy with me. And she was quite indignant, my client. She said, no one's ever talked to me like that. And I said, Joe, you have told me more than once you are bored in your job. Your new boss has come in and she picks that up. Yeah, you do an okay job, but she's not seeing any drive in you. So you are now at a fork in the road, because you're either going to have to get your mojo back and really, get yourself motivated in the role, or you're going to have to leave. It's up to you. And he said, well, I'm not ready to leave yet. I said, okay. Anyway, she contacted me a couple of weeks later, and she told me she'd resigned. And Ian, the reason I share this story is, she had been hanging around the bottom half of the phase for too long. She'd been hanging on. And it's like, if you want to sail across the Atlantic Ocean, you have to untie your boat. You can't, yep. You can't set sail until you untie your boat. And yes, it is scary because you're going out into the open sea. She was resisting, she was hanging around the bottom half of the cycle, lots of anxiety. But as soon as she resigned, right, she was straight up into the renewal phase. Like, she was very clear, she was very motivated, and it was such a joy to work with her, but she just had to let go. So yeah, just another example.
The person, because you did mention her name, would be okay with the story being in this recording.
Yeah, I spoke to her the other day, and yeah, she knows that I use it. I mean, I haven't used her surname, I haven't used the company name, so no one.
Okay, so we're all good.
Would know who she was anyway, but she knows that I use her story because it is such a powerful example.
It is indeed. And I think it's like, I've come across this hundreds of times as you have. I talk to people about changes, about changing form. And the biggest thing that's in the way is an unwillingness to change form. We want to hang on to the status quo, even when it's not serving us well. We still have this resistance, and I think that's part of the hero's journey. Of course, I had a life-changing moment, which I won't go into today. It's actually the story of next time we meet in the We Need to Talk series. When I was in my mid-30s, and I was studying theology at the time. And a part of my studies led me to mythology and the book you mentioned, Hero of a Thousand Faces, which then led to the Power of Myth series, where Joseph Campbell's interviewed by Bill Moyes. You've probably seen those videos.
Years ago, yeah.
But it sent me down probably the largest rabbit hole I've ever been in, probably in my entire life. But it formed the basis of what I do today. And so that's 32 years ago.
Wow.
It was a pivotal change, learning that the story of humanity is in many cultures. Yeah. And not just one religion, it's in them all, not just one way of living, one culture, whatever it might be, it's in them all. So it was a great it was a great journey. And I think what I came across then was my own resistance to changing form, because to really take it up, I had to leave the corporate world and all the security that brought at the time. But we'll leave that for another day.
That ultimatum from your wife was what pushed you through that, wasn't it? Because it's that kind of, sometimes we just need a push.
Yes.
But, certainly my own experiences when I jumped in feet first, like moving to the UK with no job, nowhere to live, a family to support, that was hugely risky. There were no guarantees at all. But I was so richly rewarded. I got a job better than I ever dreamed I would get, and I've found the time, and I've been a coward many times, don't get me wrong. There's times when I've backed away and not moved forward, but the times when I have, and even what's happened for me in the last 2 years, I mean, my business is going better than it was before, 2020. And I think it's, if you don't resist the change, you actually go with it, go through the difficulty, you are richly rewarded. That's my experience.
No doubt. And that's one of the blessings of your map, I think, because when you're in denial or confusion, which is below the line, another way of looking at it.
Yeah.
You know that renewal and contentment are just around the corner.
That's right. And you need examples from other people's lives and your own past where you've seen that. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, this has been wonderful, Peter. Thanks so much for sharing with us, and I'll put appropriate links in the post that accompanies the recording of this.
And for anyone who's interested, 60lessons.com, you can sign up for a free series. They're 5 to 10 minute videos on a wide range of topics. Although the last two, Ian, as you know, are more like 17 minutes rather than 5. Most of them are 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah, no, I very much enjoyed it. I'm up to I've just done lesson 59, so I very much enjoyed it and highly recommend it. So thanks again, Peter. I'm just going to...
Pleasure, Ian. Great to see you.